The radio crackled with updates from the extraction team as they moved through the city streets, their progress measured in blocks cleared and obstacles overcome. Each transmission brought them closer to the moment when stealth would give way to speed, when the mission would depend on her ability to eliminate threats faster than they could respond. Angel Command. Extraction team is 2 blocks out. Stand by for initiation. This was the moment she'd been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. The point where theory became reality, where 3 years of doubt and self-recrimination would either paralyze her or fall away like shed skin. Through her scope, she could see the embassy compound clearly now, could make out individual faces among the hostiles, could distinguish between the nervous amateurs and the steady professionals who'd done this before. All stations, this is command. Execute, execute, execute. The extraction team's movement was immediately visible as muzzle flashes erupted around the embassy perimeter. The hostiles responded with disciplined fire, their positions revealing the kind of coordination that spoke of military training and operational experience. This wasn't the chaotic firefight of insurgents. This was war reduced to its essential elements. Angel, I have hostile sniper, minaret, 2nd floor, engaging your sector. Through her scope, she could see the muzzle flash from the enemy position, could track the trajectory of rounds impacting near the extraction team's position. The enemy sniper was good, not legendary, but competent enough to be dangerous, accurate enough to turn American soldiers into casualties if he wasn't stopped. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow to the rhythm that had carried her through impossible shots in impossible places. The crosshairs settled on the window where she'd seen the muzzle flash, and time seemed to slow as her training took precedence over her doubts. The shot, when it came, felt like redemption and damnation simultaneously. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar violence, the suppressor reducing but not eliminating the sound that announced death across distance. Through the scope, she watched the enemy sniper's position go. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either death or legend. Colonel Marcus Whitfield lowered his binoculars slowly, his weathered hands trembling almost imperceptibly as he processed what he'd just witnessed through the scope. 800 meters, one shot, complete darkness, and the target wasn't just any target. It was a moving hostage scenario that had stumped his best marksman for 3 consecutive attempts. The woman who just pulled that trigger wasn't supposed to be here. According to her paperwork, Corpsman Kaya Thorne was a 26-year-old field medic, 3 months into advanced trauma training at Camp Pendleton. Her file showed decent but unremarkable scores in basic marksmanship, standard field medicine certifications, and a curious gap in her service record between 2019 and 2022 that simply read medical leave classified. What her file didn't show was why Navy SEAL Team 7's most decorated sniper, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, was now staring at her with something approaching reverence, or why the barrel of her rifle, a standard-issue M40A6 that she'd supposedly never fired in combat, showed the telltale where patterns of someone who'd been behind a scope in places where missing wasn't an option. The training exercise had been designed to humble the support personnel, to show them the gap between their roles and the sharp edge of special operations. Hostage rescue scenarios in zero visibility, with pop-up civilians, moving targets, and a timer that didn't care about hesitation. Rodriguez had missed twice, his spotter calling wind corrections that somehow never aligned. Petty Officer Carson, the team's backup sniper, had clipped the hostage on his attempt, ending his night in frustrated silence. Then someone had suggested, half-joking, that maybe the nurse wanted to try. The laughter had been immediate and predictable, until Thorne had stepped forward, accepted the rifle with hands that moved like they remembered its weight, and settled into a prone position that spoke of muscle memory older than her official service record suggested. She hadn't asked for wind speed or range confirmation, hadn't adjusted the scope or checked the magazine. She'd simply breathed, waited for something only she could feel, and squeezed. Now, in the aftermath of that impossible shot, Colonel Whitfield found himself staring at a woman who just redefined the evening's parameters. The hostage target sat untouched, while the threat silhouette bore a perfect center mass hole that the range master was already measuring with something approaching disbelief. "Corpsman Thorne," the colonel said quietly, his voice carrying across the suddenly still firing line, "I think we need to talk." The walk to the command trailer felt longer than it should have. Kaya's boots crunched against the gravel with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, steady, controlled, but carrying undertones of something she'd hoped to keep buried. Behind her, she could hear the low murmur of voices trying to make sense of what they'd witnessed. The SEALs weren't laughing anymore. Colonel Whitfield held the trailer door open, his eyes never leaving her face. Inside, the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across maps and operational briefings that spoke of places she recognized, but wasn't supposed to. He gestured to a metal folding chair across from his desk, then settled into his own seat with the careful movements of someone whose back carried too many years of hard decisions. "Your shot placement was textbook," he began, pulling her file from a stack of papers. "Center mass, clean entry, no collateral damage. But textbook doesn't explain how you made that shot without ranging the target or asking for environmental conditions." Kaya kept her expression neutral, a skill that had kept her alive in places where emotions were luxuries. "Lucky shot, sir. Sometimes the fundamentals just align." Fundamentals. Whitfield repeated the word like he was tasting something bitter. He opened her file and began reading, though she suspected he'd memorized the relevant parts hours ago. "Says here, you completed basic marksmanship training with a score of 268 out of 300. Respectable for a corpsman, but nothing that would suggest the capability for precision shooting under stress." She said nothing, watching his fingers trace over the pages until they reached the gap she'd been dreading. "Medical leave," he continued, his voice dropping lower. 3 years. Classified medical leave for psychological evaluation and treatment following an undisclosed incident. His eyes met hers across the desk. "That's a long time to be away from the Corps for someone who supposedly just treats wounds." The trailer's air conditioning hummed in the silence that followed, its mechanical rhythm a counterpoint to the weight of unspoken truths. Kaya could feel her carefully constructed identity beginning to crack under the pressure of his scrutiny, like ice under spring sun. She'd known this moment would come eventually. She just hoped it would be later, quieter, somewhere far from men whose eyes held the same shadows as her own. "Sir," she began, then stopped. The words she'd rehearsed for 3 years suddenly felt inadequate, small against the magnitude of what lay behind them. Whitfield leaned back in his chair, the metal creaking under his weight. "Let me tell you what I think happened out there, corpsman. I think someone with extensive sniper training, someone who spent time behind a scope in active combat zones, made a shot that required both exceptional skill and the kind of instinctive target assessment that only comes from experience under fire." He paused, letting the implication settle between them like dust after an explosion. "The question is whether that someone is currently sitting in my trailer wearing corpsman stripes and pretending to be someone she's not, or whether I've just witnessed the most remarkable case of beginner's luck in Marine Corps history." Kaya's hands remained steady in her lap, but inside, something she'd kept carefully locked away was beginning to stir. Memories of desert heat and mountain cold, of radio chatter in languages she wasn't supposed to understand, of nights spent motionless behind a rifle while the world turned dangerous around her. She'd buried all of that under 3 years of psychiatric evaluations and medical training, convinced herself that the woman who'd once been called Angel by men who whispered her name like a prayer was someone she used to be. "The Corps has a way of keeping secrets when it needs to," Whitfield continued, his voice gentler now, "especially when those secrets involve operations that don't officially exist and operators who were never officially there." He closed her file and leaned forward. "But secrets have a way of surfacing when they're needed most, And right now, I need to know who you really are." Outside the trailer, the night training exercises continued. The sound of distant gunfire provided a steady backdrop to their conversation, each report a reminder of the world they both inhabited, a world where precision and truth were often the difference between coming home and being remembered. Kaya looked at the man across from her and saw something she hadn't expected, not accusation, but recognition, the kind that passed between people who'd seen the same darkness and learned to carry it without letting it consume them. "My call sign was Angel," she said finally, the words emerging like a long-held breath. "Task Force Raven, 2nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, Special Operations Capable. 97 confirmed kills across 4 deployments in Afghanistan and Syria between 2017 and 2019. The admission hung in the air between them, as heavy and irreversible as the pull of a trigger. Whitfield's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, a recognition that went deeper than professional acknowledgement. "Angel," he repeated, and she could hear the weight of memory in his voice. "I've heard that name before, usually whispered in the kind of places where legends grow in the dark." He paused, studying her face with new understanding. What happened? Why the medical leave? Why the transition to corpsman? The questions she'd been dreading for 3 years now felt almost like relief. The weight of carrying her past in silence had been heavier than any pack she'd ever shouldered through hostile territory. "Fallujah Province, October 2019, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt in her chest. "Joint operation with Iraqi forces to clear a suspected ISIS command post. Intelligence was wrong. It was a school. Abandoned but not empty." She paused, watching Whitfield's face for judgment and finding only patient attention. 3 insurgents had taken position in what used to be a classroom. They had a clear field of fire on our approach route. She could still see it when she closed her eyes. The chalk-dusted blackboard, the small desks pushed against windows, the afternoon light streaming through bullet holes in the walls. Could still feel the weight of her rifle, the familiar embrace of the stock against her cheek. "I took the shot at 600 meters through a window no bigger than a dinner plate. Clean kill, mission accomplished, team safe." Her hands, which had remained steady through the telling, finally betrayed her with the slightest tremor. "Wasn't until the sweep that we found them." Whitfield leaned forward slightly, his expression grave. "2 children," she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Maybe 8 and 10 years old. They'd been hiding behind the target, using him as a shield. My round went through him and—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence that had haunted her dreams for years. The silence that followed was different from the earlier tension. This was the silence of understanding, of recognition between warriors who'd learned that victory and trauma often occupied the same space. "The investigation cleared me," Kaya continued, her voice finding strength in the telling. "Rules of engagement were followed, target identification was correct, and the intelligence failure wasn't mine to bear. But clearing an investigation doesn't clear your conscience." She met Whitfield's eyes directly. "I couldn't pick up a rifle again without seeing their faces in the scope. Couldn't trust my own judgment when it mattered most." Whitfield nodded slowly, the gesture carrying years of similar conversations in similar rooms with soldiers whose skills had been shaped by experiences they'd carry forever. "So, you transitioned to medical, saving lives instead of taking them." "Seemed like penance," she admitted. 3 years of intensive therapy, retraining, and convincing myself that I could serve without having to kill. Figured I could do more good with a bandage than a bullet." She gestured toward the door, beyond which lay the firing range where her carefully constructed new identity had just crumbled. "Tonight was the first time I'd touched a sniper rifle since 2019. And yet you made that shot like no time had passed at all." The observation hung between them, laden with implications that both understood. Muscle memory didn't fade, training didn't disappear, and the instincts that had made her one of the Corps' most effective snipers were still there, waiting beneath the surface of her new identity like a current running deep. "The SEALs are going to have questions," Whitfield said finally. "Rodriguez especially. He's been trying to make that shot for 2 weeks, and watching you succeed on the first attempt is going to bruise more than his ego." Kaya felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She'd spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of attention, the weight of expectations that came with being known for what you could do instead of who you chose to be. "Sir, with respect, I'm not that person anymore. I'm a corpsman. I save lives, not—" "You saved lives tonight," Whitfield interrupted gently. "That hostage scenario isn't just training. It's based on a real situation we might face in 6 weeks." He leaned back, his expression becoming more formal, more colonel and less confident. "We have a problem, Corpsman Thorne, and I'm beginning to think you might be part of the solution, whether you want to be or not." The weight of his words settled over her like the desert heat she remembered from deployments past, inescapable and transformative. The briefing room at 600 hours was a study in controlled tension. Maps covered every available wall surface, satellite imagery scattered across tables, and the smell of strong coffee mixed with the lingering odor of whiteboard markers. Kaya entered wearing her standard corpsman utilities, feeling underdressed among the desert camouflage and tactical gear of the SEAL team members who'd already assembled. Chief Rodriguez looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable but his eyes carrying a weight she recognized. They'd all heard by now. Word traveled fast in the military, especially when it involved someone who just shattered assumptions about what was possible. "Gentlemen," Colonel Whitfield began, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation, "I'd like you to meet Staff Sergeant Kaya Thorne. Some of you know her as the corpsman who made an interesting shot last night. What you don't know is that before she became a corpsman, she was known by a different name." The room grew quiet, the kind of attentive silence that preceded operational briefings where lives hung in the balance. "Angel," Whitfield continued, and she watched recognition flicker across several faces. "Task Force Raven, 97 confirmed kills, 4 deployments, and a reputation for impossible shots in impossible situations." He gestured toward the maps behind him. "Which brings us to why she's here." The mission briefing that followed was everything she tried to leave behind: complex terrain, high-value targets, and civilian complications that required precision beyond what most snipers could deliver. Humanitarian crisis in a fictional East African nation, American civilians trapped in an embassy compound, and a window for extraction that measured in hours, not days. "The problem," Whitfield explained, pointing to satellite images that showed the embassy surrounded by hostile forces, "is this building here." His finger traced a line to a minaret roughly 800 meters from the embassy compound. "Sniper position with clear fields of fire on our extraction routes. Intelligence suggests at least 2 shooters, possibly more, with experience and equipment that makes them a significant threat." Lieutenant Commander Brooks, the SEAL team leader, studied the imagery with the focused attention of someone calculating odds. "Range is manageable, but the angle is problematic. We'd need someone positioned here." He indicated a rooftop approximately 600 meters from the target, with the skill to make precision shots while potentially under fire. Rodriguez cleared his throat, his voice carrying a note of professional honesty that Kaya respected. "Sir, that's a difficult shot under ideal conditions. With hostile fire and civilians in the area, it's borderline impossible." All eyes turned to her, and she felt the familiar weight of expectation settling across her shoulders like a pack loaded for a long march. "I'm not that person anymore," she said quietly, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. "I'm a corpsman. I save lives." "This mission is about saving lives," Whitfield replied. 43 American civilians, including 12 children, trapped in that embassy compound. Without effective counter-sniper support, our extraction team won't make it to the building, let alone get anyone out." The numbers hit her like physical blows. 12 children. She thought of the faces that haunted her dreams, the ones she saw every time she closed her eyes, the children she hadn't been able to save. Lieutenant Commander Brooks leaned forward, his voice carrying the pragmatic weight of command decisions. Staff Sergeant, I've read your file. What you accomplished in Syria and Afghanistan, those weren't just kills. They were Americans who came home because you were behind that scope. And 2 children who didn't come home because I was behind it, she responded, the words emerging with more force than she'd intended. The room fell silent, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of professionals who understood that every capability came with a cost, every skill carried the weight of its consequences. Rodriguez spoke first, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there the night before. Staff Sergeant, I've been a sniper for 8 years. I've made shots that seemed impossible, protected teammates when everything depended on one bullet finding its target. He paused, studying her face with something approaching reverence. But I've never carried the weight you're carrying. The fact that you can still function, still serve, still care enough to hesitate, that tells me more about your character than your kill count ever could. His words hit something deep inside her chest, a recognition that she'd been carrying her trauma like a burden, instead of understanding it as proof of her humanity. The mission launches in 48 hours, Whitfield said, his voice gentler now. I'm not ordering you to pick up a rifle, but I am asking you to consider that sometimes the best way to save lives is to be willing to take them. He stood, signaling the end of the briefing. You have tonight to decide who you want to be when those children need someone to bring them home. As the room emptied, Kaya remained seated, staring at the satellite images of a place she'd never been, but that felt familiar anyway. Another mission, another opportunity to prove or disprove her worth with a single squeeze of a trigger. The armory at midnight was a cathedral of controlled violence. Rows of rifles stood in perfect formation, their metal surfaces gleaming under fluorescent lights that never slept. Kaya had come here without conscious decision, her feet carrying her along familiar paths while her mind wrestled with choices that felt too large for one person to bear. She found herself standing before the sniper rifles, each one a precision instrument capable of reaching across distances to deliver death with surgical accuracy. Her fingers traced along the stock of an M40A6, the same model she'd carried through 4 deployments, through missions that had defined her and ultimately broken her. Couldn't sleep either. She turned to find Rodriguez standing in the doorway, his uniform rumpled, and his eyes carrying the weight of someone who'd been staring at the ceiling instead of finding rest. Just looking, she said, her hand still resting on the rifle's stock. He approached slowly, respectfully, like someone entering a church. Mind if I ask you something? Depends on the question. Why'd you really transition to medical? He leaned against the weapon rack, his posture casual but his attention focused. And don't give me the standard answer about wanting to save lives. I've read between the lines of enough after-action reports to know that's only part of the story. Kaya was quiet for a long moment, watching dust motes drift through the harsh light. You ever kill someone and know, absolutely know, that you made the right call tactically but the wrong call morally? Rodriguez nodded slowly. Taliban fighter in Helmand. Had an RPG aimed at our convoy, kids playing maybe 50 meters behind him. I took the shot because I had to, but when we swept the area, he paused. Turned out he was maybe 15, old enough to kill us, young enough that someone should have saved him from being there in the first place. It changes you, she said simply. It's supposed to, he replied. The day it stops changing you is the day you become something else, something dangerous. He was quiet for a moment, then continued. But running from it doesn't make it go away. Trust me, I tried. She looked at him with new understanding. How long? 2 years. Couldn't pick up a rifle without shaking. Thought I was done, that maybe I'd lost whatever made me good at this. He gestured toward the weapons around them. Took a wise old colonel to remind me that feeling the weight of it was what made me human, that the alternative to being a shooter who cares was being a shooter who doesn't. The silence between them was comfortable now, the shared understanding of warriors who'd walked similar paths through different hells. Those 43 people in that embassy, Rodriguez said finally, they don't care about our guilt or our trauma or our moral complications. They just want to go home to their families. He pushed himself away from the weapon rack. Sometimes being a good person means doing terrible things for the right reasons. After he left, Kaya stood alone among the rifles, thinking about children in a classroom in Fallujah and children in an embassy compound thousands of miles away. She thought about the weight of bullets and the weight of inaction, about the difference between being a killer and being a warrior. At 200 hours, she made her choice. The insertion helicopter cut through African sky like a blade through silk, its rotors beating a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Below, the landscape scrolled past in shades of gold and amber, beautiful and deadly in the pre-dawn darkness. Kaya checked her equipment for the dozenth time. Rifle zeroed, radio functioning, medical supplies secured alongside her ammunition. 5 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled through her headset. Weather's holding, no significant wind at altitude. Lieutenant Commander Brooks's voice followed. Angel, how are you feeling? The call sign felt strange on her lips after 3 years of silence, like a language she'd almost forgotten but still understood. Steady, she replied and meant it. The team had rehearsed the insertion a dozen times over the past 36 hours. Fast rope to a rooftop 6 blocks from the embassy, establish overwatch position, provide precision fire support while the extraction team moved through hostile territory to reach the trapped civilians. Simple in concept, complex in execution, dependent on variables that couldn't be controlled and skills that couldn't be faked. Remember, Brooks continued, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd led teams through similar missions. Intelligence suggests at least 2 enemy snipers in that minaret. Unknown equipment and training level, but assume they're competent until proven otherwise. Through her headset, she could hear the radio chatter from other elements. The extraction team staging 2 miles south, the quick reaction force standing by for emergency support, the command center tracking multiple moving pieces across a chessboard where lives hung in the balance. Angel, this is Overwatch, Rodriguez's voice came through clearly. He'd be positioned on a different rooftop, providing security for her position and backup fire if needed. I have eyes on your insertion point, looking clear. The helicopter began its descent, and Kaya felt the familiar pre-mission clarity settling over her consciousness like a lens coming into focus. The doubt and hesitation that had plagued her for 3 years faded, replaced by the cold precision that had once made her legendary among the operators who whispered her call sign like a prayer. The fast rope burned through her gloves as she descended into the unknown 30 feet of controlled fall that ended with boots on concrete and the immediate need to move. The helicopter disappeared into the night sky within seconds, its sound fading until only the distant rumble of the city remained. The rooftop was exactly as briefed, flat concrete surrounded by low walls that provided cover and concealment, with clear sightlines toward the embassy compound and the minaret that housed their primary threat. Kaya moved with muscle memory older than her doubts, establishing her firing position and beginning the methodical process of range estimation and environmental assessment that had kept her alive through 4 previous deployments. Angel in position, she reported, settling behind her rifle with the familiarity of returning home. Copy, Angel. Overwatch has you visual and is standing by. Through her scope, the embassy compound looked like a fortress under siege. The building was surrounded by vehicles and armed figures, their positions suggesting tactical knowledge that went beyond simple terrorism. These weren't fanatics with more passion than training. They were soldiers, and that made them infinitely more dangerous. Command, Angel. I have visual on the embassy. Count approximately 20 hostile personnel in view, with positions suggesting coordination and planning. Recommend treating this as a military operation rather than a terrorist incident. Copy Angel. Extraction team is moving to your location. Estimate 15 minutes to contact. The minaret rose against the night sky like an accusatory finger, its ancient stones dark against the star-filled African sky. Somewhere within those walls, enemy snipers were settling into their own positions, preparing to turn the extraction routes into killing fields. The mathematics of the situation were simple and brutal. Whoever shot first and shot true would determine whether 43 Americans came home or became statistics. Kaya adjusted her scope, accounting for the distance and elevation difference between her position and the target. 847 meters, according to her rangefinder. Wind minimal but shifting, temperature dropping as dawn approached. Variables that would affect bullet trajectory and required constant monitoring. Angel Overwatch. I have movement in the minaret second-story window, possible sniper position. Through her scope she could see it too. A brief flicker of movement, there and gone, but enough to confirm what they'd suspected. The enemy was in position and waiting, just as she was. The radio crackled with updates from the extraction team as they moved through the city streets, their progress measured in blocks cleared and obstacles overcome. Each transmission brought them closer to the moment when stealth would give way to speed, when the mission would depend on her ability to eliminate threats faster than they could respond.